They still talk about that night, though never when you're in the room. Some stories get softer with each telling, like the edges wear down over time. Not this one. This one gets sharper. Every time they whisper it, the blade gleams a little brighter, cuts a little deeper. It started with a door. The boss's door. Heavy wood, thick as a vault. The kind you knock on only if you've been summoned, or if you're ready to disappear. Most men linger outside, psyching themselves up before they walk in. You didn't linger, you didn't knock. You pushed it open like you owned the hinges. Inside, the air was heavy with that smell only power has. Expensive cigars, old leather, and fear pretending to be respect. The boss sat behind a desk that looked more like an altar, his chair taller than it needed to be, his hands folded in that way that said, "You're already in my pocket. You just don't know it yet." Around him, his lieutenants stood like statues, silent, waiting. They thought they were there to watch a meeting. What they got was an execution. You didn't sit. You didn't greet him. You walked forward until the desk was nothing between you. He looked up slow, like a man who's been interrupted for the last time in his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but your hand was already moving. It wasn't rage. It wasn't messy. It was surgical. A single, deliberate strike that left no room for misunderstanding. One moment, the boss was leaning back in his chair. The next, his head hit the polished wood with a dull, final sound. The room inhaled all at once and forgot how to exhale. You didn't give them time to mourn. You leaned forward, close enough for your shadow to swallow him, and then you spit. The sound of it cut through the stillness like a gunshot. And then, as if you were asking something casual, something that didn't matter, you let the words drop. Who else wants to die? It wasn't shouted. You didn't need volume. It rolled out low, steady, like it was just another line in a conversation you were already winning. That's why it hit them harder. Yelling can be ignored. Calm cannot. Calm means you've done this before. Calm means you can do it again. They froze, every single one. Not because they were unarmed, but because you'd just shown them how useless their weapons were. You didn't even glance at the guns tucked under their jackets. You didn't need to. They knew that if they drew, they'd just be the next example. And here's the part they'll never admit. None of them stepped forward because they'd already decided they weren't ready to die. Right there, in that moment, you owned them. Not through contracts, not through favors, through something stronger. You owned the space between their heartbeat and their breath. The boss's right-hand man, the one who'd been with him since before the Empire had a name, shifted his weight like he might move. You didn't look at him. You didn't need to. The shift stopped. His courage evaporated in real time, and everyone saw it. That was the kill shot for the rest of them. Not the boss hitting the desk, but the man they thought was iron turning to water. You stepped back, slow, giving them the mercy of space. Mercy they didn't deserve, but mercy they'd remember. You didn't leave quickly. Quick is what prey does. You lingered, scanning faces, letting your eyes rest on each one just long enough for them to wonder if they were next. By the time you turned for the door, no one had moved, not even to check the body. Out in the hallway, the world kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside that room, time had stopped. They were still standing there, still breathing shallow, still trying to process the fact that the man they'd called untouchable was gone, and that you were still standing. Word spread before you even reached the street. That's how stories like this work. They run faster than feet, faster than bullets. The city didn't hear that the boss had been killed. The city heard that you erased him, like he was a mark on a page and you just rubbed him out, clean, like he'd never been there. And with that word came the rest of the sentence. The one you dropped into the air like poison, who else wants to die? They repeated it the way people repeat something they don't understand, but can't stop thinking about. They repeated it because it made them feel something ugly in their stomachs. See, killing the boss would have been enough for most. But you didn't stop there. You turned the moment into a question mark hanging over everyone's head. A challenge that no one wanted to answer. That's the part they'll remember long after they've forgotten the details of the strike. Not the motion of your hand, not the angle, not the sound, but the question. The question that told them the game had changed and they weren't ready to play. For days after, they moved differently. The lieutenants walked with their shoulders tight, their hands twitching toward their sides at the smallest sound. The city's usual noise felt thinner, like even the streets were holding their breath. No one knew where you'd be next, or if you'd even bother showing up again. You'd proven you didn't need to be everywhere. You just needed to be possible. They started testing each other, quietly, carefully. Who would fold under pressure? Who would try to fill the empty throne? No one did. Not because they couldn't, but because the chair didn't look empty anymore. It looked like it belonged to you, even when you weren't in it. And that's the real reason you won. Not because you were faster or stronger, but because you understood something the boss never did. Power isn't in the throne. Power is in the fear of what might happen if you're not in it. You turned that fear into currency, and now you own the bank. They'll keep whispering the story, adding little details to make themselves feel like they were closer to the truth. They'll say the boss saw it coming. They'll say he had time to reach for something. They'll say the room was colder, darker, smaller than it really was. All lies. Because the truth is simple, and they can't stand how simple it is. You walked in, you erased him, you spat, you asked the question, and nobody answered. And that silence, no, that absence of answer, is still ringing in their heads. It's why they twitch when your name comes up. It's why they flinch at footsteps that sound too confident. It's why they'll keep pretending they don't remember the exact tone of your voice when you said it. But they do. They remember every syllable. And as much as they want this to be over, it's not. You didn't close the book that night. You tore out the first chapter and rewrote it in your own hand. The rest, you'll write that as you please. Which brings us right to where the next move begins. They expected you to vanish after that night. That's what men like them would have done. Deliver the blow, claim the trophy, then disappear before the dust had settled. But you weren't raised on the same diet of fear and caution they were. You didn't leave, you didn't hide, you stayed. You walked the same streets, turned the same corners, drank in the same bars. Only now, when you stepped inside, heads tilted, not because they wanted to greet you, but because they needed to track you, the way prey tracks the shadow of something circling above. It wasn't arrogance that kept you visible, it was strategy. Disappearing would have told them you were done, that the event was over. Staying told them the opposite, that the event wasn't an event at all. It was a beginning. You wanted them to understand that the boss's fall wasn't the point. It was the permission. You'd given yourself license to rewrite the order of things, and now you were carrying the pen everywhere you went. Some of them couldn't stand it. The lieutenants, men who'd been inches from the boss's ear for years, saw their own relevance dripping away by the day. Without him, they were figureheads with no figure to point at. They tried to gather in back rooms, to whisper about doing something before it's too late. But the problem with whispering is that it makes you sound guilty, and guilty men make mistakes. You let them think they were invisible. You let them think their little meetings were secrets. All the while, you were sitting 3 tables away in the same dim-lit bar, sipping slow, letting their eyes skim right past you because they couldn't believe you'd just sit there. The boss had trained them to expect theatrics, to think power moves had to be staged like theater. You trained them to understand that the most dangerous man in the room is the one who doesn't bother to announce himself. And then came the first test. A man named Corvino, built like a slab of concrete, a voice that could grind glass to powder. He'd been the boss's enforcer once, the one who stepped forward when others stepped back. He decided he'd be the one to answer your question from that night. It happened in broad daylight. You were crossing the market square when you saw him coming. He didn't rush. He wanted you to see him, wanted the crowd to see. He thought this was his moment to reclaim the throne, for the ghost of the man you'd erased. He stopped a meter from you, the sun behind his shoulders, shadow stretching over you like some kind of threat. "I heard what you said," he told you. His voice carried. People turned to listen. "I'm here to say I'm not afraid." And that's when you smiled. Not big, not theatrical, just enough for him to know you were already past the point of talking. He reached for the knife at his hip, and that was the mistake, because he thought this was a duel. You knew it was an execution, one motion, that's all. His knife never cleared the sheath. He was on the ground before his brain caught up with what his eyes had seen. The crowd gasped, then hushed. You didn't spit this time. You didn't need to. You just stepped over him and kept walking. The message was written in the stillness that followed. Yes, I meant it. Who else wants to die? By the time you turned the next corner, the story had already grown teeth. They'd say you didn't even stop walking. They'd say you killed him with a glance. They'd say the knife vanished from his hand before anyone could see it. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the echo of the first night had just been doubled. That's when you noticed the shift. The city stopped moving the way it used to. Conversations became shorter. People started keeping to the edges of rooms. Eye contact became a luxury no one could afford. You'd thought you'd broken the hierarchy when you erased the boss, but now you saw it more clearly. You hadn't broken it. You'd replaced it. And replacement comes with responsibility, not the kind written in rule books, but the kind enforced in whispers and glances. If someone was robbed, they came to you. If someone wanted to make a move, they sought your permission. They weren't paying tribute in coins or gifts. They were paying in submission. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you realized the question from that night had taken on a life of its own. You didn't need to say it anymore. The words hovered in every room you entered, stamped across every nervous glance. Who else wants to die? Wasn't a challenge now. It was a filter. It separated the ones who might stand beside you from the ones who'd crumble. But you knew there were still a few out there, men who'd been too far from the room that night, who didn't smell the blood in the air, who thought they could ignore the change. One of them was Sorek, a smuggler who'd been skimming from the boss for years. With the old man gone, Sorek figured the throne was empty, and empty thrones attract fools. You didn't send for him. You didn't summon. You just appeared at his warehouse one night, standing in the open doorway while his men loaded crates. He froze when he saw you, but he tried to play it casual. Asked if you were there to talk business. You didn't talk. You walked in, right past him, and laid your hand on the nearest crate. The lid wasn't even nailed shut. Inside, rows of stolen goods, stacked like trophies. You didn't say a word, you just looked at him. It was worse than shouting. It was worse than threats. Because in that silence, he heard the question again. He knew the answer. He dropped to his knees before you reached him. No bargains, no excuses, just surrender. That's when you understood the full weight of what you'd built. You didn't need to kill everyone. You just needed everyone to know you could. The streets carried the lesson for you. People repeated the question in their heads before making decisions. Whole plans were abandoned because someone asked, "Do you think they'll come for us?" And no one wanted to find out. Your shadow became longer than the boss's ever was, not because you cast it higher, but because you moved without needing to be seen. But power like that, it doesn't stay clean. Not everyone bends. Some break the wrong way. One night you got word that 3 of the old guard had started moving weapons without your knowledge. They weren't trying to challenge you directly. They were testing how far away from your gaze they could operate, testing your reach. So you showed them. You found them in a cellar, laughing over their own cleverness. You didn't wait for them to notice you. You walked in, and the laughter died mid-breath. You didn't draw a weapon. You didn't need to. You reminded them of the rule written in the boss's blood. Who else wants to die? They didn't even answer. They just dropped everything and ran. You let them. Running, after all, is its own confession. The city saw them leave and understood. They'd been measured and found wanting. And if they ever came back, they'd answer the question in full. By now, the story of the night you erased the boss had become more than history. It was prophecy. People told it in low voices, not to relive the past, but to remind themselves of the present. They'd look at the chair the boss used to sit in and swear they could still see the mark your spit left on the floor. They'd say the question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away, and you didn't chase the story. You let it grow wild, let it twist itself into shapes even you wouldn't have thought of. Because that's how legends work. They outgrow the man who made them, and by the time they come back around, they're sharper than when they left. Now, when you walk into a room, no one waits for you to speak. They've already heard you. They've heard you every day since the night the boss fell, even when you said nothing. That's the real victory. Not that you killed him, but that the killing never stopped happening in their minds. And this state of constant reminder, this city living under the question mark, that's where the next chapter is written. And it starts before they even realize you've turned the page. Because while they're still living in the shadow of that night, you've already started drawing new lines on the map. Lines no one asked for, no one agreed to, but everyone will obey. That's the advantage of striking first. You don't need permission when you've already written the terms in someone else's blood. The first move was small, almost invisible. You didn't take over a block or a business, you took over a habit. The old routines they'd inherited from the boss, gone. Meetings that used to happen at midnight started happening at sunset. Streets they thought were safe suddenly became checkpoints. You weren't just controlling territory, you were controlling time. And when you control time, you control how long someone gets to breathe before you decide otherwise. It's easy for them to pretend they don't notice for a while. They talk about the boss's old rules, about the way things used to be, like that's still an option. But nostalgia is just a slow death you can't feel until it's too late. You'd killed the man, now you were killing his ghost, piece by piece. But in every empire, there's always one who thinks they can rewrite the ending. For you, that was Marek. Not as brutal as Corvino, not as slippery as Sorek, but smarter. Too smart. He'd watched you since that night, never making a move, never stepping forward, waiting for the moment everyone else thought you'd softened. And then one night, Marek stopped waiting. It was a rain-slick street, the kind that eats the sound of footsteps. You were walking alone, by choice. That's when you saw him step out from a narrow alley, hands in his coat pockets, like this was just a casual conversation. No audience this time, no crowd to witness. That was his mistake. "You've made your point," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes gave him away. There's a tension in the jaw of a man trying not to flinch. The boss is gone, fear's in every corner, but fear fades, and when it does, someone will come for you. You didn't answer right away. You stepped closer, slow enough for him to feel the weight of each stride. "Fear doesn't fade," you told him. "It matures. It learns to breathe on its own. And right now, it's breathing for you." His hand twitched inside his pocket, probably a knife, maybe a gun. You didn't give him the chance to decide. In less than a breath, you closed the space, and when his hand came up, it met nothing but air. His weapon clattered to the ground before he understood how far away it was from his grip. You didn't kill him, not yet. You leaned in, close enough that your voice didn't have to be loud. "You think you're the one who writes the last chapter, but the last chapter," you said, "is written over your body. Do you want to be the ink, Marek?" He didn't answer, not out loud. His silence was its own surrender. You left him there, weapon on the wet pavement, wondering why you'd let him live. And that was the point. Death is final. Doubt lasts forever. Word of that encounter spread faster than a killing would have. People knew Marek, knew he wasn't the type to scare easy. If he backed down, what chance did anyone else have? And without saying the line again, you'd made sure it was repeated in every whisper. Who else wants to die? The question had stopped being a challenge. It was now the password to survival. But the thing about building something from the bones of what you've destroyed, there's always someone outside the city who hears about it and thinks they can take it. Outsiders don't understand the language of your streets. They don't know the weight of the moment when you erased the boss. They hear the story, but they don't feel it. That's why the outsiders came, 3 of them, each with their own crew, thinking they could carve out a piece of your territory while you were busy keeping the locals in line. They didn't send a messenger. They didn't announce themselves. They just started moving in. Which was perfect. You didn't confront them immediately. You let them settle just enough to feel confident. Let them believe the rumors were exaggerated, that you were just another name people used to scare children into behaving. Then one by one, you found them. The first was taken in the middle of his own celebration, a table full of his men around him. You walked in alone, no warning, and the laughter died like someone had cut the lights. You didn't draw a weapon, you didn't shout, you just looked at him, held his eyes, and tilted your head toward the door. He followed, because men like that would rather die in the alley than in front of their own crew. He didn't come back. The second thought he could hide in numbers, surrounding himself with twice as many men as you'd ever seen him with before. You stepped through them like they were furniture. They moved aside without knowing why. You took him by the collar, walked him out, and left him on the docks, alive. Barely. The third never saw you at all. He woke up to find every man he trusted gone, scattered, their loyalty dissolved overnight. His own shadow abandoned him, and somewhere in the emptiness, he heard the question he was never meant to answer. The city learned something from those three. They learned that the question wasn't local. It traveled. It crossed borders. It found you wherever you thought you were safe. By now, the story of that night, the boss, the spit, the challenge, had gone beyond the street where it happened. Traders told it in distant markets. Sailors carried it to ports where your name had never been spoken before. And everywhere it went, the effect was the same. Men straightened up when they heard it, checking themselves, wondering if they'd survive meeting you. But here's the truth you never said out loud. Killing the boss wasn't the most savage thing you did. The most savage thing was letting the story breathe without you. Not chasing it, not correcting it, not stamping your name on it. You let it live like a wild thing, growing teeth in the dark, so by the time it circled back to you, even you could admire its shape. And still, there were those who didn't believe. Not the outsiders, they'd learned. These were the young ones, too young to have seen it, too reckless to respect it. They thought they were different. They thought you were just another man who'd gotten lucky once. So one night, you gave them a reminder. Not a massacre, just a demonstration. You picked the loudest of them, the one who'd been saying your name too often, and you brought him to the exact spot where the boss had fallen. The stain was still there, not visible, not to the eye, but in the air, in the ground. You stood him there, and you told him the line, not loud, not for the crowd, just for him. Who else wants to die? And in that moment, he understood. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a question anymore. It was the key that unlocked the truth about this city, about the world you'd made. Survival wasn't about strength or speed or even loyalty. It was about knowing when to stay silent, when to step aside, and when not to be the one who answers. By the time you turned away, he was already broken. The others saw it in his eyes when he came back, and they stopped speaking your name altogether. Now the city moves to your rhythm. You've erased the boss, erased his memory, and replaced it with something sharper, something that breathes in every shadow. You don't need to kill to prove anything anymore. The proof is in the way people look away when you pass, in the way they change the subject when someone even hints at your name. This is the end of the story for them. But for you, it's never an ending. It's just another page turned, another step in a game you've already won before they knew they were playing. And if anyone, anywhere, ever forgets, if they start to think the question doesn't apply to them, then all you have to do is ask it again, because the answer never changes.